Well, hello again, everybody. Oh my goodness, it has been such a long time since I made the previous video, and a lot has happened, so let me catch you up. So in the middle of October, we moved out of our old house, and we spent a couple weeks in hotels as we wrapped up life in Colorado and slowly made our way towards California. And then the house hunting began, which ended up taking a long time. Thankfully, we were able to find a little guest house to rent, and it was comfortable and it was cute and everything, but it was a little bit of a challenge because there were 4 of us plus the dog living in one big room, and the kitchen wasn't quite a full kitchen, so that was a challenge as well. That's actually when I made the podcast episode called How to Keep Your Sanity When You're Swamped, and if you listen to that episode, you'll notice that the sound quality isn't as good as the others, and that's because I actually had to record it in the back of our minivan, which was the only place that was even remotely quiet enough to record a podcast. So that was a little bit fun. But we found a house, thankfully. We got all of our stuff. We moved in just before Christmas, and we've spent the last couple of months in the chaos of unpacking. And now it is March, and I'm very happy to say, we are settled into our new home. Now, of course, during that initial part of the unpacking with all of the moving trucks and stuff, there was no way that I could pause and do a video. Even if I had the time and energy and just mental bandwidth to do it, it was never going to be quiet enough or long enough to do that. But instead, what I did is along the way throughout the process, I took a bunch of pictures and I took some silent, some muted video footage, which I will splice into this video so you can kind of see for yourself what it looked like. So in this video, I want to talk about that very first initial phase of unpacking, specifically how I protected my family and myself from developing bad habits. So people who know me well know that I'm kind of notorious for misplacing things like my cell phone, my keys, my sunglasses, and I spend way too much time searching for them if I don't keep them in their designated spot. Well, I knew I was going to designate a spot at some point during the unpacking process, but I didn't know where that would be. And in the meantime, I knew that boxes would be everywhere, everything would be shifting around, and so I wanted to designate a safe, out-of-the-way place for cell phones, keys, and sunglasses. So I thought, hey, you know what? We'll just put them up here on the mantle. Made perfect sense to me, worked really, really well. That only lasted for about 4 or 5 days, because after that, I found my little birdie basket and I decided, hey, the birdie basket is where all of the keys and cell phones are gonna go, and I have a nice little spot for it. The funny thing is, in that short time, like I said, it was just 4 or 5 days, that habit of plopping stuff up on the mantle grew so strong that here I am like 3 months later and I still find myself doing it. Where are my sunglasses? They're not in the birdie basket where they're supposed to be. I put them on the mantle again. It always amazes me how fast a habit can build. I actually warn people about this in my moving mini-series. Once you unpack something and put it somewhere, even if in your mind it's only temporary, that thing wants to live in that spot forever. Changing your mind later, changing the habits of the house takes a lot of effort. So the only way to avoid those kinds of difficulties is to make very thoughtful and careful decisions about where things should go and how each space will operate. Well, that's not really realistic, is it? I mean, come on, I can't possibly be that intentional with every single tiny little item that I own. Even if I had the energy for that, it would take so much time that by the time I'm done with one room in the house, I've already started to build habits in all the other rooms. So it obviously doesn't make sense to try to be careful about everything, which means, of course, that we have to prioritize. So during that very first crucial week of unpacking, I decided to focus all of my intentionality energy on the most important room of the home, the one room that absolutely must function well. For me, that's always been the kitchen, because the kitchen is where the vast majority of my regular everyday tasks take place. If my kitchen doesn't run smoothly, every other part of my life gets harder. And if I allow the bad habits to start, like leaving your dirty dishes on the table or using one of the drawers as some sort of a catch-all dumping ground, those problems will last a really long time and they will continue to cause trouble. So from the very first day, I was resolved to get the kitchen right. So on the very first day, after the movers had finished delivering the first half of our stuff, they left at about 4 o'clock. The house was filled with boxes, but I ignored all the other rooms and went straight to the kitchen and got to work. I just opened one box at a time, slowly and carefully making decisions about where things should go. I had to visualize a typical day in my mind. Where am I going to stand when I'm making my coffee? Is that going to get in the way of the kids getting their breakfasts or preparing their school lunches? And how am I going to prevent one of these drawers from becoming that dumping ground catch-all drawer? I have to give each drawer an assignment so that that doesn't happen. More than once, I had to backtrack and change things around. I thought this would fit in this cabinet. It didn't fit. I had to pull it out, rearrange everything. I mean, it was a lot of work, and I stayed up well past midnight, which is hard for me. I'm not very much of a night owl. I'm more of a morning person. But on the bright side, everybody else was asleep, so there weren't any distractions, and I could just do my work in peace. The next morning, of course, the movers brought in the second half of our stuff, and some of those boxes was more kitchen stuff. So once again, I stayed up late that second night, opening boxes, moving things around, making adjustments until I felt confident that the kitchen would run smoothly. That was a big investment of my time. And it did mean ignoring the other spaces for a while, but that was a calculated decision. For example, one of the categories of stuff that I intentionally chose to ignore at the very beginning was actually my wardrobe. I had been living out of a suitcase for the last 3 months. What's another couple of weeks? I mean, I'm wearing the same jeans and sweatshirts every day anyway while I'm unpacking. If I didn't need to give it my attention, I totally ignored it. All of the boxes that were labeled clothing and shoes, I just shoved it into a corner of the master bedroom and pretended that it didn't exist. And then a few weeks later, after the kitchen was settled, I went back to my closet, opened the boxes, and slowly and carefully thought about how to set up my closet. Then there were those in-between categories, like cleaning supplies, medicines, first aid. We did need to access that from time to time, but I wasn't ready to make thoughtful and careful decisions about where everything should go, and so I created a holding space. I just said, here's the big box of cleaning supplies, here's the big box of medicines, I'm gonna leave them on the counter of the laundry room, so it's not ideal, but at least we knew where to look when we needed something. Now, there was one more room that it might surprise you to hear that we completely ignored, and that was the garage. Every time a box came off of the truck and it was labeled with something that we knew would go in the garage, we said, just shove it in the corner. Pile it up as high as you can. It doesn't matter. It was a complete disaster, but it was a very intentional disaster. I'll tell you why we were able to get away with this was because we knew that in about a month, maybe 6 weeks, we were going to paint the walls of the garage and pour epoxy on the floor. And that project would force us to take everything out of the garage temporarily and then put it all back. So if you're going to take everything out and put it all back and start from scratch anyway, there was no way I was going to waste any time or energy making decisions about how the garage would function. So a month and a half later, everything was pulled out of the garage, and while I was painting the walls, my husband was slowly going through those boxes, organizing things, making a plan for how the garage would be set up, and then we put everything back in a very deliberately organized way. Now, if we had not been locked into that epoxy project, if it was just a vague idea of something that we might do at some point in the future, but we weren't sure when, then we definitely would have spent a lot more time and energy getting that garage right from the very beginning. And that probably would have meant that I wasn't able to spend as much time and energy on the kitchen. It's all about budgeting your time and energy and spending those precious first few days on whichever space matters the most to you in that particular move. and every move is going to be a little bit different. And this means, of course, that you're not going to do things perfectly from the very beginning. We've been in this house for 3 months now, and I still look around and say, I don't really like the way that that is working, or I think I should move where those things are. I'm going to reorganize that thing later. My office, for example, is not set up very well at all, but that was, again, a calculated decision. Looking back, I have no regrets on investing those 2 nights of staying up really, really late. That fatigue, that effort is just a memory. But waking up in the morning to a kitchen that runs smoothly and functions well, that makes my day so much more enjoyable on a regular basis. So looking back, it was absolutely worth that investment. So that's just a little bit about how my family decided to take advantage of our do-over opportunity and to set us up to build good habits from the very beginning. Now, I've got one more installment that I want to add to this mini documentary, and then we'll wrap it up. Bye.